Thank you, Chris. That was beautiful. And thank you, Jim, for being my worship associate this morning. We just met. So I think we've done well together, and thank you. You have a lovely voice in the pulpit. And thank you to Troop. Good morning, Troop. Hey, I have been here a number of times, and I was ordained by this congregation, so I really have a very soft spot in my heart for all of you. And I don't know how many of you were here for when Reverend Jason was ordained, but we had to have these little fans that day because it was like 110 degrees or something in here. So thank you for bringing me the fan. There was an era in the 50s through the 80s, quite an era, at least for the Unitarians, when we were known by some as God's frozen people. Sermons were sometimes 45 minutes long. Mostly academic, the music was almost always classical, but not always sung or played as well as Chris does. Candles weren't very important, and the lighting of the flaming chalice really did not become a ritual which was widespread until after 1983, and it took some time to move across the country. Spoken word, of course, is still important, and Unitarian Universalist ministers like to call ourselves the learned clergy. But now, more than ever, the beauty of a variety of readings and music and poetry and scriptures from many sources feed our souls. They don't always just address our troubled hearts, our fears, or our concerns, but also they give us moments of lightheartedness and humor and lift our spirits. I recall when I found out about Unitarian Universalism, I think many of us have those UU birth narratives. Oh, I remember the day somebody told me, or I discovered the book, or I read a newspaper clipping. Some of us might even describe that new understanding of this new faith possibility for us as a spiritual awakening. I had grown up in a house with a Roman Catholic Lithuanian mother with whom I still live and care for, and my Spanish atheist father. And I actually like to credit them both for my Unitarian Universalism. Fortunately for me, it was while I was in high school in 1963, when a mentor at the YMCA, upon my explaining to him my personal theology, told me he thought, "You're a Unitarian Universalist." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, you better go to the library and find out." So I did. And the only book on Unitarian Universalism in the Long Beach Public Library was a book by Jack Mundelson, and it is called Why I Am a Unitarian Universalist. So I read it overnight under the covers in my bedroom and realized it was the religion I had been seeking. A rational, ethical, historical religion which I could freely embrace. And honestly, I think it was as close as you can imagine to having some kind of a spiritual conversion experience. It was that same year in 1963 in which I experienced another spiritual awakening. It was at a YMCA weekend camp. The beauty of the mountain surroundings, the gathered community, the wonderful mentoring of truly kind and caring adults, I felt transported as if I had arrived in heaven. When my atheist father picked up my girlfriend and I from the camp in his car, she and I burst into song, something we had been singing all weekend. Do any of you remember the song, "I Believe"? A few of us older folks remember that. It was written in 1953 during the height of the Korean War. It wanted to give people hope. And there are all kinds of myths about the song. Don't believe any of them. It was just written by, Frankie Lane, and it became a big hit, which was the first time a song from a TV show had become the kind of hit that it did, because TV was pretty young then. The song goes, "I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that somewhere in the darkest night, a candle glows. I believe for everyone that's gone astray, someone will come to show the way. I believe above the storm, the smallest prayer will still be heard. I believe someone in the great somewhere hears every word. Every time I hear a newborn baby cry, or touch a leaf, or see the sky, then I know why I believe. My dad started to chuckle, but then he saw how much my girlfriend and I loved the song and how it had such deep meaning to us as we sang it. Now remember, I was a very impressionable young teenager at the time, but this was the same time I had read Why I'm a Unitarian Universalist. So my rational mind had been soothed by finding this ethical religion, but my soul was still longing for the beauty of music and poetry and candles and flowers. Jumping ahead 3 decades later, I had been a member of a Unitarian Universalist church for some time when we called our first woman minister. The first woman minister in that congregation's 100-year history. On her first Sunday in the pulpit, she invited us into meditation. At that time, this was definitely not a universal worship practice for Unitarian Universalists. Seeing the surprised looks on the faces of the congregation and the pained response of some of the older men, she said, "Don't worry, it's just an invitation. I'm not expecting any of you to become bliss ninnies." And I've loved that term ever since, bliss ninnies. She was funny, and she let it be known that it was okay to be open to trying something new, if just to be respectful. But others were more reluctant. It took some time. Honestly, I'm not sure how I recall how I responded that day, but I participated. It was an untried experience for me, but it opened me to a time in the service to relax, to let go, to be there, to appreciate the space and the people all around me, and to trust my experience. Many of the women in the congregation were moved. Some were moved to tears. Some said they felt a shift in the way that they had experienced worship in ways that they had never experienced in their previous faith traditions or even in Unitarian Universalism. Naturally, this is not all that the new minister brought us. She was as smart as a whip. She had been very successful in business before entering ministry, and she invited us to go deeper into ourselves. Her sermons were provocative, intelligent, and warm and humorous. Gee, for a woman, and a lesbian at that. While we Unitarian Universalists don't have a creed, no statement of belief or dogma to which we need to subscribe to sign on a dotted line, or a set of rules laid down by some authority, usually men on high, who determine what's true, what's absolutely true, and the only thing that is true. But what we have is our 7 principles. We, the people, in our UU congregations, over a number of years, after thousands of meetings and discussions of both the laity and the ministers and the religious educators, all of us were asked to participate to create this religious document for us, this beautiful collection of principles, often referred to as that which is commonly believed among us. Our principles are not commandments. There are no shalts and no shalt nots. Instead, they are carefully articulated value statements, which are an interconnected web of our aspirations. This year, I began preaching at my own congregation a series of monthly sermons about the principles. Not surprisingly, many of our members, in fact, many of our members who had been there for 30 and 40 years, did not know the history of our principles or purposes, or how taken together they are an amazingly unique, interdependent list that supports each one and supports us. The third of our principles states that we covenant to affirm and promote our acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. This morning we heard and we sang and we moved to various expressions of what spirit means. But I guess we need to come to some kind of an agreement, for this morning's purposes anyway, of what is spiritual. I would like to propose for just this morning, for your contemplation, that we could define spirituality as that relationship that people have with themselves, the relationship that they have with others, the relationship that they have with the community, and that's something larger than themselves, no matter what you call it. Call it God, the divine, the goddess, the creation, the cosmos, the natural world. Whatever it is that you believe is something larger than yourself. This spirituality is lived out in a variety of ways, in a variety of spiritual practices. Prayer, meditation, reflection, rituals like our beads this morning, and some things which bring people closer to their inner being, like biking and hiking and gardening and singing. So many activities. It is also expressed in our theological understandings as well, whether these be in Christianity or Buddhism, Judaism, other faith traditions, or in just as powerful and meaningful ways in atheism, agnosticism, panentheism, naturalism, the gamut. What is not found in our Unitarian Universalist principles are people who believe in that are idiots. That's not us. Okay, sometimes it's a little difficult to believe that someone actually believes what they believe when you talk to them about their spiritual practice, but it is our spiritual practice to accept and encourage people on their spiritual journeys. We covenant to also affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, not just some people, every person. That's a challenge. And you can see how they fit together. In 2005, the Unitarian Universalist Association published a study of our congregations called Engaging in Our Theological Diversity. In this district, the Reverend Tom Owen Toll, who some of you may know, and the Reverend Dr. Ken Brown created a workshop in which clusters of congregations could explore this together to see how it is we hold all these differences. Did any of you participate in that? No one. I did at the San Dieguito congregation. What surprised every one of us was that even among all those differences, what we had in common was that we thought each of the other people were disrespectful of our faith tradition, whatever it was, or not. We simply wanted respect. We wanted to hear other people's stories, and we wanted them to clearly hear our own. In my own congregation at the time, the Anaheim Unitarian Universalist Church, I decided to lead us through the same program, and we had the same results. So I asked a few of the participants in the program if they wouldn't like to share a sermon with us on their faith or no faith. And so we had faith of an agnostic, faith of a biblical humanist, and a whole lot of others. My favorite was the faith of the agnostic. The fellow was pretty new to our congregation. He was obviously very vocal about his humanist leanings, which was great, and he was thrilled that he was welcomed into our congregation and that his spiritual journey was as important as anyone else's. So he was very funny, and he thought he would do something clever. He came and he started to tell us all about how one should believe. And then he flipped around and he put on a necklace that had a big question mark on it. And then with that, he launched into why you should be an agnostic. Why would you ever be able to believe anything? There's no truth out there that was the truth with a capital T. And then he'd flip around again, and he would be the guy that was the hellfire and brimstone kind of preacher, getting you to believe, and then flip around again with his agnostics question mark. And I still have that question mark on my jewelry. I should have worn it. You know, every time I do this sermon, I think I should have gotten that off there and worn that. So, don't we all want to be supported in our spiritual journey where we are, not expected to be where we should be or could be or were? So I'm going to give you an opportunity now in a few moments. I'll let you reflect on it for a second, maybe not 2 seconds. I'd like you to get together with somebody that you don't know as well as you might know somebody else, and I'd like you to turn to that person and tell them about a spiritual practice you have, or, since we don't have a lot of time, a spiritual experience that you had. So I have this little bell that I have had since I've been 5 years old. It was part of one of those little music kits. And I'm going to ring it after you find your partner. I'm going to ring it, and then you're going to have about a minute to tell the other person, one or the other, a spiritual experience you've had or a spiritual practice that you have. And then I'm going to ring it again in about a minute, and you switch. So if you're comfortable, move around. If you're not, talk to the person next to you. It's up to you. So find another person with whom to speak. All right, person number 1 begins. Okay, you're going to switch. I know that's not a lot of time. All righty. I hate to bring you back together because I see that you're having some very lively conversations, and I saw a body prayer right here in front of me, which was lovely. I saw you. Is that the one? Is it the one Tara taught at one time? Tara and I used to teach a body prayer up at camp. You made it up. That's even better, because then it belongs to you. That's fabulous. So, now you know a little bit more about the person sitting next to you, even though it may have been somebody you've known for a long time. And it wasn't a long time that you had to share that. So I am hoping that you will continue to share, whether it's a coffee hour today or another gathering, so that you'll know that you too have a spiritual path. And you can share it with other people, and it's perfectly fine where you are on your path right now and wherever it is you plan to go. Our third principle, lifting up the acceptance of one another, says much about Unitarian Universalists. In some faith traditions, there is one way, and only one way, for you to legitimately experience yourself as a spiritual person. For us, it's essential that we come together in that recognition that we are all spiritual in our own ways. It is who we are and who we should be encouraged to be our very best selves. It is to provide a place where, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you are welcomed here as we each continue to seek and to find which brings us wholeness and health. We both need the inner and the outer communal journey. My colleague and friend, the gentle atheist, Reverend Dennis McCarty, says this: each of us goes through life self-contained and alone, within a space of a soul from which we look out at the world, which no one will really ever be able to fully enter. Yet our soul space becomes healthier and happier and wiser when we let another enter. Let's listen to others. Let's share with others. Let's laugh and love and, yes, weep with others. There is no doubt that changes will continue to occur for all of us on every one of our journeys. We will experience both joys and sorrows and the spiritual growth which accompanies them. Here in this congregation, together we will have an opportunity to be strengthened, challenged, comforted, inspired, and loved in mutual support as individuals and in community, to do what needs to be done, to do better, and perhaps even to do less. How fortunate we are to be here at this time together in our spiritual and religious home. Amen and blessed be. Now, I don't want you to be God's frozen people. I'm going to tattle on you to Rev Tara. You know, she's been my best friend, or one of them, for 20-something years. And I'm going to tell her that how you sing this next song. So I'd like you to rise in body and spirit as you're comfortable, because Chris is going to play us into